My name is Liz Schwartz. I'm the Director of Communications and Strategy at the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School. Um, Welcoming our guests and moderator, who I'll introduce in a moment. But first, just wanted to give a little background on the David Nyhan Prize, which honors journalists who illuminate the stories behind our politics and policymaking. It is a prize for journalists who peel back the curtain on how public policy really works, showing who is pulling the political levers, describing what that means for people's everyday lives, and suggesting how the practice of governing can be made more fair for all. The Nyhan Prize for Public Policy Journalism honors mid-career or later career journalists who demonstrate a substantial body of work over time, while the David Nyhan Emerging Talent Award, which is new as of a couple of years ago, honors early career journalists who show great success, potential, and drive to do the kind of journalism the prize honors. David Nyhan, who this prize is named after, was a fellow at the Shorenstein Center in 2001 after a long career as a columnist and reporter at the Boston Globe. David's work was renowned for challenging the powerful and acting as a voice for those whose voices were seldom heard in the pages of the newspaper or the halls of power. His writing had a style and a humor that made him beloved around the region. As his friend and colleague Bill Ketter said, his columns gave clarity to the convoluted, employing robust language that informed readers no matter their station in life, and always with heart. Whether his subject was the president or precinct worker, he was truly the conscience of his community. David sadly died in 2005, and in his memory, his family and friends endowed this prize at the Shorenstein Center to honor and encourage the kind of journalism that David did and loved. We're thrilled to have some of them with us today, including Nick Nyhan, his son, who is one of the judges for this prize, and are grateful for their ongoing support of this program. The other judges this year were David Vondrelli, the longtime columnist at the Washington Post, and Allison King, who was a longtime political reporter here in Boston for NBC TV. And unless Nick wants to say anything to welcome folks.
I'm just super happy that Judd and Samantha are part of this.
Great, thank you. So I'll turn it over to Robert Downen, who will moderate this conversation today and also won this Nyhan Prize in 2023. Robert is now a senior writer at Texas Monthly, where he focuses on the intersection of politics and religion. For that, he covered politics and extremism for the Texas Tribune, where his work on the influence of far-right mega donors and white supremacists in the Texas GOP won or placed for numerous national investigative awards and this prize. Native of the Chicago suburbs, Robert arrived in Houston the day before Hurricane Harvey and soon after began leading the Houston Chronicle's groundbreaking coverage of sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Convention, coverage that led to historic reforms, new laws in Texas, and a Department of Justice investigation. So Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone who's joined us, and congratulations to our two winners. I'll start with some quick bios. Samantha Maldonado is a senior reporter at the digital nonprofit news outlet The City, where she covers climate, housing, and the politics in New York City. She also teaches at the City University of New York's Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Previously, she covered energy and environmental policy for Politico. Her reporting has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, the AP, and CNN. She was a Global Exchange Fellow with the Urban Design Forum and a Climate Economics Journalism Fellow at New York University Stern School of Business. Second, we have Judd Legum is the founder and author of Popular Information, an independent newsletter dedicated to accountability journalism. Popular Information won the 2020 Online Journalism Award for excellence in newsletters, and its reporting was credited by Bloomberg for bringing a, quote, political reckoning to corporate America. Previously, he founded and served as editor-in-chief of Think Progress, a progressive media outlet. In 2008, Legum was the research director for Hillary Clinton's first presidential campaign. He is a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center and Pomona College. So thank you guys both for joining me today. I'm really happy to be, hosting this conversation. And again, just congratulations. I mean, I wanted to start, and we are, for those kind of listening, we are going to kind of do, 20, 25 minutes of just me talking with Samantha and Judd, open it up to a kind of conversation between them, and then leave a little bit of time at the end for your own questions. So if you do have any, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But first, I want to start, I think it's interesting that, the two award winners this year are coming from what are, what would once be considered kind of non-traditional news outlets, news environments, but really have become, I think, more increasingly the norm. I mean, can you guys kind of just first walk me through a little bit about your path to here? Tell me a little bit about your, I guess, quote unquote newsroom, and how, being kind of in these digital spaces, these digital focused spaces has kind of enabled you to do this kind of accountability work in ways that, a more traditional outlet may have not been able to do so.
Oh, sure. I guess I'll just start with it, and then you can take it after that. Um, so yeah, as you mentioned in going over my bio, I was at a nonprofit newsroom called Think Progress, now defunct, around 2018. It was fairly successful and was growing, and there was 30, 40 people there, and over time, I kind of realized I'm no longer doing any of the work that I like to do. I'm no longer actually writing and reporting and researching. I'm now managing a bunch of people. So I was looking for an opportunity to get back to really digging in and doing my own work. And that's when, just at that time, that's when Substack was starting. And it appealed to me for that reason. I knew it was set up so that they handle sort of the technical aspects of it. And for a couple of years, I did it completely on my own. And that's really what I wanted to do, because I didn't want to manage people. I wanted to do the work myself. Over time, as the newsletter has grown, and my ambitions for it grew, I have taken on staff. So now my newsroom includes myself and three other full-time people. So it's still a relatively small group. I think that's the way I like it. And I actually think that there are many stories. There are stories that really benefit from having a large newsroom. 50 people, 100 people. There's newsrooms with thousands of people. But I think that you can do very good work with three or four people, and that most stories only require that much, as long as you realize you're not going to do every single story, and you pick and choose what you're doing. And at the same time, being independent and relying exclusively on people who are just have individual subscriptions, I don't have any of the pressures that you might have if you have either, you know, large funders, or if you have a larger corporation over top of you with their own interests. So that really has freed me up. I think I constrained myself even kind of subconsciously when I was at a larger organization, even in ways that I didn't realize at the time, because you sort of are in your mind anticipating how certain kinds of stories could create problems for you. And that's really led me kind of down, over the years. I've been doing the newsletter 8 years now. It's really led me down the path to a lot of the focus that I have, where I can really like dig into corporate influence, corruption, how money and power is impacting the system, the political system, and the country overall. So
How do you feel like your voice has changed over that time? I mean, I have to imagine being, no longer you are not the face of an entity, you are the entity in so many ways. I mean, I have to imagine that kind of changes the way you're approaching, even just down to the prose you're using.
yeah, I think maybe not so much the pros, because I do like to leave. I don't really consider myself. I don't hide my opinions. I'm not trying to present myself as a neutral person. And in the about page, I talk about my background in politics, and that I kind of identify as a progressive. But at the same time, as far as the pros, I like to leave room for readers to kind of come up with their own thoughts about it. But I do think, as far as the topics and my approach to the topics, I have really kind of honed in on the things that I feel like are maybe the things that people don't talk about, and that can sometimes be uncomfortable to talk about when you are within a institution in DC and elsewhere. I mean, for instance, today I wrote about the emerging role that online sports books like DraftKings and FanDuel are going to have on the 2026 midterms. And it's not just an issue with one party or another. They're really spreading the gamut. So you're kind of criticizing the whole system and exposing how the whole system um, is being maybe pushed, nudged in a particular direction by this new source of money. And I don't have to worry about it. I'm sure that might upset some people, and I do definitely get phone calls and letters and threats and things like that, but I don't have to worry about anyone other than how I feel like responding to those.
Great. Samantha, do you want to tell us a little bit about, your backstory, how you got to where you are, and, just how being in a digital, nonprofit space has changed the way that you approach your work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I started in nonprofit communications and got my feet wet in journalism, did a lot of stints in different newsrooms, and found myself at the city. I'm going on 5 years there now, and we are, a nonprofit digital newsroom. So similarly, we have different sources of funding, but it's not, we're not feeding the beast to maximize profits in any kind of way. And that sort of both with our mission and with the sort of structure of the city, it gives a lot of freedom for what we can cover and what we need to cover. We have under a dozen reporters at this point, and so we know that a city as vast as New York, you can't cover it all, but we're doing our best to really pick our lanes and to sort of zigzag when there's certain stories to do. Perhaps there's an angle that other outlets aren't looking at, or we can really sort of meet our needs of the audience. We often get questions all the time just from people like, how did these processes work? What does this mean in terms of getting affordable housing? All sorts of things. So that's a need we can definitely fill. And also just, I'm really lucky in that we definitely cover the news, but we also are given a lot of time to really go deep on stories, to sort of make sure that we're getting a full picture, or to really be able to kind of cultivate the right sources to show a story or approach it from a certain angle that is really unique to us.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is a very broad question, but so much of your coverage is about the policy that is so often getting lost, amidst all the noise of coverage in any market, but let alone in a place as big and as important as New York City. I mean, how do you kind of sift through the noise? Like I was reading through, some of your mayoral election coverage, and it just struck me that like you were talking, whereas so many other outlets were talking about, the kind of personality horse race of it. You've got stories talking about, whether I can't remember what was the exact one. The about whether electric charging stations are dangerous. Like, how are you kind of both as a journalist, but also as an institution, like finding the time in this incredibly busy, incredibly chaotic news environment to take a step back and be like, this is actually what matters to our readers. This is, I'm just really interested in the process of how you avoid those kind of horse race style stories.
I mean, I think there's room for both, but for us, we know that that's not what we can do with our limited staff, with our limited capacity. Our audience maybe isn't as interested in that. They can go to other outlets that are doing the more horse racy stuff. For me, when I was covering the election, the mayoral election, to be clear, the two things that were in my brain as, the things that sort of drove my coverage were who are these people as New Yorkers in terms of the candidates. I try to write for normal New Yorkers who are not, policy wonks necessarily, although they also read my work, but just normal people who are living day to day. And so how can I treat these candidates as normal New Yorkers? And the other thing was, what issues are normal New Yorkers, not that there's one kind, but what are those things that are really going to affect their lives? So for instance, the battery storage story that was sort of, it became a campaign story as well. That was just because I keep hearing from different entities, both communities and also kind of like policy regulators, people in the energy space about batteries. It was sort of a conversation that I was just hearing on my normal beat. And so it just felt like a really sort of solid story to do. It brings in a candidate, it brings in current policy and future policy, and something that actually people are starting to hear about and care about.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I was at previous to where I am now, I was at Texas Tribune, which is also a nonprofit news outlet, and I feel like there was such an emphasis on being in constant in contact with community in ways that like I've just never have seen at a for-profit. Like at a for-profit model, it seems so often, or I guess at more traditional models, you are talking to people who influence and shape policy, not as much as, the kind of people who are downstream from it. I mean, I guess I'm wondering, as an operation, are you guys specifically focused on cultivating those community ties? Like this whole, community-based journalism thing that really seems to be growing in popularity and impact is so interesting because it does kind of, to a certain degree, I think, flip the kind of conventional approaches to journalism on its head.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. We're trying to, show kind of regular New Yorkers in our coverage and also have an ear to the ground to figure out what is going on. What are the concerns and the questions and just the big issues that people are dealing with. And also just to, if there is a type of disinformation we're seeing or a kind of lack of information, we can try to fill that void within communities.
Sure. Going to Judd, one of the things I've always really appreciated about popular information is that, you are, as you were saying earlier, you kind of have found specific little niches that you can fill specifically when it comes to the influence of corporations, the influence of, I guess just the AI industry. I mean, one of the things that you have done a lot of that I've seen a lot of is just kind of writing stories that are holding corporations accountable for, say, funding election denialism, funding, still putting advertisements on Twitter. How do you kind of think about those stories? When does a story like that hit the, I guess, we don't throw the word moral around a lot in journalism, but that is kind of what it seems like there's a certain democratic moral kind of bar that they have to clear in order for you to kind of write that story. How do you think about that and how do you, I guess, navigate what can kind of, I think, be a very delicate line between holding a bunch of corporations accountable without making it seem like you are, I guess, engaging in pure advocacy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing. I think it involves there's no kind of formula for it. I think it involves sort of kind of developing a sensibility about the news, about the culture, and understanding where, I'm very interested in where there's a mismatch between kind of the public communications of corporations and the images that they're portraying to the public, whether that's through advertising or, their website or just their whole kind of brand ethos and what they're doing with their money, whether that's in politics or elsewhere. So I guess is where when I see that mismatch and it seems something significant.
Mhm.
I do think that you need to be careful about, yeah, just kind of pounding on people, for every single thing. You certainly could write a story about that every day, but try to avoid that. And yeah, I think that's my approach. It's really about thinking about when it that the corporations themselves set the standard and where does it violate, where are they crossing the line over into those standards. In other cases, it's just based around I like the documents. I like when new information comes out, it's sort of like, well, this is all potential stories, so it's just a matter of looking through and seeing what's interesting. And some of the stories just go from that way. I knew that, on Friday there was a big dump of FEC reports. So, I'm looking through them and seeing what's new, what's something that I haven't seen before. What is this telling us about where we're, kind of where we are and who the players are.
Sure. Just kind of a little bit of a broader question, but open to both of you. I mean, you both have been kind of in spaces that have been thrust at some points or have been kind of perpetually part of the national conversation, especially over the last year, whether it's New York City and the mayoral race, whether it is AI, the kind of just broader rise of what I think we could argue is just a very corporatist government in Judd, what you cover. I mean, what do you kind of, as you've seen more traditional outlets move into your spaces, what lessons have you kind of learned being, closer to these subjects? Where do you think that they're getting things right? Where do you think that they're getting things wrong? I'm just kind of interested in how you guys reflect on, being kind of the subject matter experts in these issues that have been really thrust into the mainstream, increasingly over the last year or so.
You want to go? You want to go this time, Samantha?
Sure. I'm trying to figure out how to answer that question. I think, I don't know that I know exactly what you're asking. However, I can see, New York, for instance, with our new mayor and this new administration being just you know, everyone is looking at us and understanding that where I sit and where my news outlet sits is sort of closer to things, and to just sort of keep that in mind. We are a local outlet covering New York City for a local audience. Um, and so it's interesting sometimes to hear from other people outside of New York City or to read coverage outside of New York City that has this sort of framing that is not the perspective that we would bring. We live in New York City and we cover it in a certain way because we live here. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's one thing. I think the perspective is different, being closer to it and being affected by the policies in particular ways and understanding how different communities are as well. And I think the other thing is just when being on a beat, for instance, energy or climate, and sort of understanding some of the nuances or building up an expertise around it as a reporter, when some of those big issues come home to roost and just seem to be more of interest to a general audience or to other either outlets that aren't covering it or to just normal people. And I think about, for instance, like rising energy bills, um, to see what perspectives or talking points or facts, whether or not they're true or not, are parroted in other kinds of outlets versus what we are trying to do. So yeah, I can't say ours is better or worse. I would say it's better, but it's definitely things that we have been tracking for longer or are closer to it versus other coverage. I'm not sure if that answers it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sorry. If it was a convoluted question, basically, I apologize, but Judd?
Yeah, I think, as far as what I think people are doing well, if you look at kind of the influence of money in politics, I think there's so much incredible investigative journalism that's being done in a whole bunch of outlets, including outlets that, financially and maybe as far as the number of people they have are kind of like going off the cliff and there you wonder what the future of these places are going to be, but still there's great reporters there who are doing amazing work. For instance, I mean, this isn't a publication that's on the downward track, but the Wall Street Journal had an amazing story about the UAE a few days before Trump was inaugurated, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to buy, almost 50% of his crypto company. And then, of course, and this was some previous reporting, then they were access, the same person who bought it got access to AI chips that were, that previously they were not going to be allowed to have access to because there was concern it would be transferred to China. Incredible story. And there's stories I see every day that I wish I would have written those stories, and I'm looking for my own. The thing that I think is kind of missing is that there's a narrative flow and kind of a rhythm to this coverage that where it all seems kind of the same and it all sort of blends together. And it's almost like there's a certain body, a certain space for the kind of potential corruption issues, and it's just going to be filled. And then, but the next person who's president or the prior people who are president, they're going to have just as much coverage, regardless of their conduct. So there's a lack of kind of perspective and the ability to explain to people how this compared to what we've seen in the past so that people can make sense of what this means. I mean, previously we've had months of repeated coverage just on the idea that potentially maybe foreign money could indirectly flow to a relative of somebody who's been president. Um, here we have hundreds of millions of dollars going directly to the president. It's two different things. They're treated fairly similarly. So that's where I think it kind of misses the mark. And that my belief is that the role of journalism is to explain to people the truth of what's happening and the facts about what's happening. And too often, I think and especially, here we are in 2026, the last couple of years, there's a real prioritization of appearing to be unbiased, and that almost is put ahead of clearly explaining the story and the importance of the story.
Okay, well, I will open it. I know you guys have questions for each other, so I'll kind of just hang back while you guys ask those. I don't know if you want to start, Judd, or I'll leave it up to you guys to decide who wants to start. But
Yeah, sure. I'll start. I guess I'm interested I'm always interested in kind of the process of these um, stories, and I would be interested to hear from Samantha. Um, and I know you've worked for kind of like a variety of newsrooms, so this could be really in any of your positions. But what to you is the biggest what's the biggest obstacle you face consistently in producing the kind of stories that you want to write? What is the biggest obstacle that you kind of consistently face?
Oh, that's hard. I don't know if this is the biggest, but lately it has been about getting people on record that have information and want a story about that information, whether it's about their own personal lives or the struggles they're going through, or how they're navigating a benefits program or something, or they know something about city government that they want public, but clearing that bar of how to confirm the story, either getting them on record, which lots of things to consider for a person to do that. Um, but this is consistently the thing. I feel like there's a lot I know in my head or that I hear, but I can't put it into a story. And that is so basic, but it happens all the time. And I've got maybe three or four things kicking around right now where I'm just like, I just need to confirm enough information or have X amount of things in documents or on the record or out of a person's mouth that will put their face and their name behind it. And I just don't have that. So that is something I'm consistently facing. And I don't know. Every time I can get something over that bar, it feels like a miracle. And I'm really grateful for my sources for that. But yeah, there are certain stories that I just haven't been able to do yet, or I'm working on them and they haven't seen the light of day yet because I just can't, I don't have that threshold. And explaining to sources why it matters. And also, frankly, the risk they're taking, that's a challenge. It's something I want to be straightforward about. And it also feels sometimes like, it's not to my best interest as a reporter, but it's to their best interest. So that is a struggle.
I agree. So frustrating, especially when you have a source that really wants to get the story out there and maybe even came to you with the express purpose of
Yeah.
getting a story out there, but doesn't understand like what you need in order
Yeah,
to get it printed. Like you can't just have, oh, I heard blah 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 blah. It's not
exactly.
really be enough to get something printed.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I could give you, if this wasn't recorded and we were off the record, I could give you examples of what that looks like. I'm sure you have them yourself, but that's consistently just a frustration and it's a challenge, it's just the job. But I feel like I'm facing that a lot in the last few weeks and it makes me feel crazy. So yeah.
Well, I think there's also just more people, I think there's more of a culture of retribution for speaking out within a variety of organizations, and that nobody wants to be seen as, kind of crossing people politically. So I think people are very much hesitant to speak out. When the Trump administration came in and there was this avalanche of news in DC, initially I was just like inundated with tips and people, just like constant, like you couldn't even keep track of all of the different people who were contacting me. But then what I realized is those were the people who were planning on leaving.
Mhm.
So they weren't that worried about losing their job because they were on their way out anyway. And so about 3 months in, when all those people left, it became much, much more difficult to get people to substantiate stories about what's happening.
Yeah, yeah, that's real. That's definitely real, especially when people are not, yeah, sure about their future. I think if somebody's about to leave, they kind of understand what's going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my question for you, I guess it's related to exactly what you were saying, being inundated with tips and also covering, nationally and the government. And there's a million storylines and subjects and angles. And so I'm curious how you pick your targets and how you prioritize, whether that's for big stories or just day to day, how to shift through kind of all that noise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's trial and error, for sure. Um, in one respect, it reflects the topics that I'm interested in, and that so that's kind of one bar to clear. But I think probably the more important thing is I'm trying to think about, well, where's a place that I can add value, and there's lots of stories that are big, important national stories, but I don't really want to get involved in them until there's something that I can bring to it. And usually, and so that either means, there's different ways to do that, but that either means that I've, got some sources who are giving me documents. That's kind of the best. But probably the more consistent way that I can do it is just like using the research capabilities that we have and the time that we're willing to spend digging through digging through that. And trying to find the kind of, I think the through line is how is money impacting this story? A
Mhm.
lot of my best stories, I think, have come from looking at something that happened and thinking about who benefits from this. Who are the people who are profiting from this? Um, and sometimes it doesn't yield an interesting result, but a lot of times it does.
Mhm. Well, similarly, just to follow up,
Mm.
when you talk about research capabilities and digging,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much to dig into, literally. So how do you choose what is worth it? Where do you put the boundary to say, okay, we've done enough digging, we'll table this for now, or we'll move on?
Um, I really think I really think that in order to produce good stories, you have to be willing to just invest a lot of time in stories and then just kill them. Like if you want every story to be successful, then they're just not going to be, you can do that, but it's just not, they're not going to be that interesting. So you kind of have to take a swing and you have to be willing to, and this is something I have to explain to the folks I have working for me now too, that like, it's okay. Like, even though you've spent 2 weeks on this and now I'm saying it's really not that interesting, and so we're not going to run it, like, that was not a waste of time. That's what we need to do because next time it will pan out. Um, and yeah, I think that I'd rather err on the side of doing too much um, than too little. Um, but yeah, I just think you have to just figure out, you just have to through experience try to make a judgment as to whether some other avenue of research is going to be um, has a chance of success or not. Um, and yeah, that's kind of like a judgment call. But I'm always really interested in finding like a new bucket of things, a new place to look for stuff. Um, and there's a lot of different buckets out there. So there's
So many buckets.
always, yeah, there's always stuff to do.
All right. Well, I'm gonna cut to questions we have in the chat. If you have any, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A or chat. I guess either way works. But I'll start with first one. What have you guys found to be good ways of engaging your readers in helping you gather relevant info or perspectives for your reports?
For me, I think showing up to things, just showing up to, community events or getting my face in front of people, whether it's going to a hearing or, just trying to be in contact with as many people as I can. That's helpful. And I just think, my colleagues do a really good job of making sure that we're accessible, to say, ask us a question or to send us an email. And that's just a great way to not only hear what people are thinking and hear kind of the questions they have and things like that, but also to, yeah, just engage with our audience and to connect with others.
One of the things that's really helped me over the last couple of years that I didn't do a good job of before is just being really open, like with my Signal handle and just putting it. Um, I'm actually thinking it somehow got cut off now, but for many months I had it just at the bottom of every newsletter and all my social accounts, and then also just taking the time to actually request and appeal to people for tips and ideas. Um, that's that's so valuable. And there's just a ultimately, I think that's really the job is to try to sort of, figure out like what's the next thing. And you're only gonna have so many ideas and insights yourself. The real stories are out there with other people. So just letting them know that you really want to hear from them. Um, and even when what you get back is not that great, just being nice and polite and keeping a good line of communication open because you never know the next thing that that person has might be the big story.
Next question, I'm going to edit a little bit, but is what was your most difficult story, and how did you go about tackling it? We'll make that the 1A and then 1B, and how did you tackle it in ways that made it so it got the views necessary to make it profitable? If you can't answer 1B, I understand. It's a little bit difficult as uh, to think about, but
Um, yeah, I could go if you want some more time to think about it.
Yeah.
Um, so one that was from a while ago now, but was a difficult story was right around I think this was March of 2020 when it was sort of the onset of the pandemic. I was interested in doing a story about restaurants that were not offering paid sick leave. And so I got a bunch of, I sort of put a bat signal out and I ended up focusing on the Darden chain, which is Olive Garden and a bunch of other brands. And I kind of got the sense just from talking to people that they were offering paid sick leave in states where it was required, but where it wasn't required, they were not offering paid sick leave. But I couldn't get that confirmed. So basically, uh, here in DC, they do require paid sick leave. So I went to one of the Darden restaurants and confirmed that. That was kind of easy because they were like, "Do you get paid sick leave?" And they were like, "Yes." But then I went to Virginia, where they don't require it, and went to the Olive Garden there. And I had to have several meals over a course of days, like at the Olive Garden, because people were not answering and going to different Olive Gardens because people were not answering the question. They didn't want to answer. Like I would ask the question, like I would be eating and then I would ask the question and then they would send like the manager over to like talk to me. And but eventually I got someone who was um, willing to confirm it. And that actually, after that story was published, Darden started offering paid sick leave. So that was one of the big victories for the impact stories for the newsletter. But as far as profitable, um, that's not how the model of a subscription newsletter works, which is great, right? When you have an advertising model, you can see if something's profitable because each issue has its own monetization based on how many views you get. When I was at Think Progress, we were a nonprofit, but we did have advertising, which was helping support us. So I knew that that model was really broken because you can it's always better to aggregate because I can aggregate a story in 30 minutes and I can that can sometimes be my biggest story versus a story you spend 4 weeks on might not even do as well as that. It just doesn't even compare. But with the subscription model, it's about building trust and building a deeper relationship with the reader so that they say, yes, I want to subscribe. And I don't even have a paywall, so it's more like I kind of believe in this sort of an NPR type model. Like I just want to support it because I like that it exists in the world. So I think a story like that ultimately like is profitable, but it you don't have to worry about like was this particular story like worth the time to generate the views, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'll take the second part first, just to build off of that. Similarly, we're a nonprofit, so we don't have to be profitable. We do have to pay our bills, but it's not like page views dictates the money we get. And I think similarly, it's just we don't have a paywall. It's about building trust. It's about kind of being a product that our readers appreciate, and maybe they'll throw us a bone, and our funders as well, but that really just frees up a lot of room to cover things that we think are important or that our readers are asking for versus, aggregation or covering a kit of the news of the day, which maybe gets a lot of eyes, but ultimately is, not as deep or has a value add the same way. And then in terms of most difficult story, I don't know about if this was the most difficult, but it was certainly most involved. And I think there were consistent obstacles I had to overcome. I worked on an investigative series with a former colleague about it wasn't deed theft because it was legal, but it was about sort of fraudulent and definitely predatory real estate transactions that were targeting a lot of like Black and brown homeowners in Brooklyn and Queens. And that was really difficult because there was no real database. We had to collect one ourselves and make that. And that just took hours and hours and hours in front of a screen going through different kinds of court documents and, business records and triangulating lawsuits and just making that. So that was really difficult. Building trust with some of the victims was really hard. People didn't trust us as outsiders, knocking on their doors or giving them a call when they've already had that, and it led to a pretty bad outcome for them. And then just being able to sort of put blame and where it is, and also spotlight the system that led to this because it wasn't illegal. So trying to figure out what the kind of voids were, the white space maybe of where was the law opening up gaps for this to happen, and why wasn't anything being done about it. So all of that was really hard, and it was a really long process. But again, that's the kind of thing that we were able to do as kind of a nonprofit news outlet where we had the time to do it.
Next question is a big one. If either of you guys have a solution, please let us know. How do you think political polarization can be reduced? I guess not solved, but reduced.
Um, yeah, it's a big question. I'll answer it this way. Um, I don't think necessarily that reducing political polarization should be the goal. There's been times when there's been a lot of consensus around things that turned out to be not so great. Um, in my sort of adult lifetime, one of the issues that where there was the most consensus across party lines and people of all ideologies, although not complete consensus, was the Iraq War, supported by both parties pretty vociferously. Um, I remember it was a big news story that one Democrat actually spoke out against the war. Um, and didn't there was a obviously a lot of bad outcomes there as far as just many people dying and lots of money being spent. And I'm not sure that it accomplished much geopolitically. But so I think the question is not how can we all agree on things, it's how can you, what is the impact that the political system has on people's lives? And if the best way to do it is to have a really contentious political system where people are fighting, then that's great. Obviously, it's not great to have a lot of dissension over things that um, are, maybe one side is a fantasy and the other side is true. Like that's not great. It's not great to just be fighting all the time and to be dysfunctional. But I don't think consensus is worth pursuing on it for its own on its own terms. I think there should be more of a focus on um, the the impact of the political system itself.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, how much of that do you think, you know, your approach to journalism, I think, is in some ways kind of a reflection of the fact that people are okay with a certain level of polarization or partisanship. I mean, can you kind of talk about the rise of, I guess not the rise of, but the way that we as an industry have started rethinking our views of this kind of view from nowhere journalism in this era of partisanship?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to think about how it's really the idea that you should sort of be this objective source that have no views. That's actually the exception rather than the norm. I mean, there was a long history of very partisan outlets that were actually just sort of organs of political parties. And, the idea that um you should sort of appeal to everyone was really driven by advertising and the need to sell more papers so that you could sell more ads and charge higher prices. Um, I don't think it was ever really based on the fact that that's the way that people want their news. Um, so so I think it's changing. And to me, the what people are looking for is authenticity. And people have opinions and ideas and views, which is not to say that you want to impose them on other people, but you don't need to, I don't think that you need to kind of tie yourself into a knot to hide them from people and to try to, because I think what happens is that the journalism that tries to be that way actually doesn't succeed. They're still making political choices. It's just other different political choices. So I think as people are drawn towards authenticity and sort of trusting the person, and that's why I think maybe kind of through social media and other means, that's what people are drawn to. I think the kind of style of journalism that's a little more open about the biases and then says, here's who I am, and then you do what you want with this information, I think has grown in kind of popularity and currency.
Samantha, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that this has anything to do with partisanship necessarily, but I think about empowerment and how if people read national or international news, that's great as long as people are, consuming news. But local news has a very interesting role to play, and just, people care about what's going on where they are, and I think feel definitely more empowered to participate or understand those systems that make things the way that they are where they are. And whether that's, getting involved with their community board, the fact that a community board exists and this is what it does, I think, it just makes people feel different about being a citizen or a member of a community or a member of a city versus sort of seeing headlines that feel an arm's length or further away than that. And I think, the way people think about themselves in community or as part of a society definitely shifts based on, local versus national versus whatever kind of news.
All right, next question. I am wondering if your reporting has been affected by the fact that many statistical databases or data sets that used to be collected by the federal government are no longer being made public, if they are being collected at all. And yeah, how can journalists deal with such information gaps?
I can start with that one. A little bit. Yeah, a lot of like climate information is going away at the federal level. There are efforts to kind of archive those and do other things to make it accessible to journalists and people looking for that information, which I appreciate. My reporting hasn't been super affected by that yet, but also I have to say, as a local reporter, New York City has pretty good data.
Yeah, I am interested in data. I haven't had a lot of personal um, issues just because the data sources that I use the most, which is probably the SEC, the FEC, the government contracting databases, like those are still all up and running. I know that there's a lot of scientific information and other kinds of information that have been removed and that are impacting people. And I've done some reporting on that issue itself. So I know it's a big deal, but it just hasn't, just through happenstance, it hasn't really impacted, my approach and my day to day. But I do think in general, this data is how we can help us understand the world. And my hope is that it'll at least be preserved so it can sometime be restored. Um, we need more of this kind of information, not less.
Um, it seems common now for opposing views to just label the others as lies and never admitting otherwise. How would you respond if Trump tells the world that your story is lies and or misinformation, despite you having sources and the facts that corroborate your writing?
Well, that happens all the time. If you write critically about someone, they'll usually say that it's not true. I think one of the things that I'm always thinking about when I'm writing is what what is the subject of this going to say? Of course, you reach out to them to try to get their comment. A lot of times, sometimes they'll get back to you, sometimes they won't. Um, but you kind of want to think about that before the story is published, and I think you should be prepared to defend it, and you kind of need to be your own worst critic, sort of most bad faith critic, looking to poke as many possible holes in the story as you can before you publish. So then, at the point at which someone's coming back and saying this is wrong, you should know exactly what you'd say in response, which is this is established, this is established, this is established. Sometimes I write 4 times a week, probably um, 48 times a year, roughly 48 weeks a year. So that's quite a few newsletters. I've been doing it for many years. So you do make mistakes. So if somebody says this is a lie and this is misinformation and you're wrong, then you need to be very upfront about it. And so that does, has happened to me. And I think that's part of the process is knowing like when to take your lumps, and when to just admit that you were wrong because even with your best efforts it will um, happen sometimes, but I think you have to push towards 0% and then you'll end up with hopefully just a handful of problems.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it just harkens back to what I was saying earlier about kind of a high bar for getting things on record and establishing evidence and backing that up. And just being open to understanding that there's could be things that we're missing, but to sort of guard against that.
Next question. Um, You both represent newer, innovative models for journalism and information, an independent newsletter and an independent nonprofit newsroom. What's your advice for consumers on how to find high quality info and news, and how do your readers find you?
Um, okay, I guess I'll take it first, Samantha, then you go.
Sure.
Um, so I think the process of identifying um, reputable sources for news, I think, is more and more difficult. Previously, you might have just relied on your local paper that everyone relied on, and maybe one national paper, and that was that. Now, information is coming at you from all sorts of different sources. But so I think you need to like evaluate those and see like, is this person, are they just reporting something, or are they backing up what they're saying? Are they sourcing it? Do they have primary sources that they're linking to? So one of the things I'm always trying to do, if I talk about a document, I'm like screenshotting part of the document, and then I might link to the whole document or upload the whole document right into the newsletter so you can look at that yourself and see that there's something behind this. If you see somebody who's just making assertions and it doesn't really have any of that, which is can be an issue with video, much more difficult to source, although you could put it in the notes, something like that. Well, then it might not be as reliable. So you need to look for those things and then find a group of folks that you can trust. Um, as far as how people find me, um, that's one of the things about being independent that's can be sometimes interesting, but is more work than when you're part of an institution. It's people find me by things that I do. When I first started this newsletter in 2018, I took my inbox, I downloaded every person that I had ever emailed, and I sent them each an individual email saying, "Hey, I'm starting this newsletter. Would you please just check it out?" That was like 2,000 plus like emails. And then, social media. Now, over the years, Substack has a recommendation. So, you get other newsletters who are recommending you, and those get, kind of offered up to their subscribers. And then the best way is just writing good stories that have some news that are breaking news, and then other outlets with different audiences will cite you and give you credit, hopefully, and then that can bring people that way. But it's a constant, that's part of this new form of journalism. There's a lot of good aspects to it, but part of it is, you're your own marketing team, you're your own HR team, you're your own legal team, like all of those functions that there might be people to help you with at a larger place, you are now doing yourself.
Yeah. I think you covered a lot of it. I would say also, we are a sort of scrappy news outlet. We don't have the most Googleable name. So just word of mouth, trying to we fight for our links. If somebody else references a story we've done or reporting that we've done first, we, are constantly like, put our link in there. We need that. Just being online, getting new subscribers to our newsletter. Anytime I have sort of a platform, I tell people, including everyone watching here, if you don't already, please subscribe to our, it's called The Scoop. It's our daily newsletter. You'll get our reporting. And in terms of finding, reputable outlets that you trust, I just recommend that people chat with others in their communities, whether it's their friends or family, about what they're like taking in and how. If obviously we all scroll, but getting off of those platforms and to homepages or to I don't know what you call it in Substack, but if you click right onto the person's page and newsletter, I encourage that. And also, if you ever are in touch with a journalist, just ask like, what are your sources of information? You can sort of tell that based on the links they put into their stories, or if they're on social media, what kind of things they post. But usually it's like if you find somebody that's reputable, the people or sources they tell are reputable, usually are.
All right, well, I think we'll end it. If you guys are open to one or two more questions, I think we have one or two left in the chat. Is that cool with you, or do you guys need to go?
I can do it.
Okay,
Yeah, I can
cool.
do it.
We'll make them quick. How do you think about developing trust with your audiences, especially when reporting on divisive political issues?
think sticking to facts and having the evidence to back it up to really, if to the extent I can in my stories, show the reporting and due diligence I've done. And then also, of course, if there's things people might not like, to just be upfront about what's coming. The no surprises rule is helpful for sources, but also for people who may disagree with something that is reported.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, it's all about um, just establishing the facts. And I guess the more contentious the issue, you just have to just like raise the bar and really like lock everything down. And then the chips will fall where they may. I think you're muted, Robert.
Perfect, because I was mumbling to myself.
Okay.
I think we have one more. Oh, where did it go? I apologize. I don't remember the exact framing of the question, but basically it was, t briefly tell me, one story that you're particularly proud of, how you went about it, and the kind of public policy impact that it had. Or I guess not public policy impact, but just impact more broadly.
It's so hard to think about these, I have to say.
Yeah, I can go first, so you have a little bit of time to speak.
Great.
Think while I'm thinking. Probably the story that I wrote that probably had the biggest impact, although maybe not the most lasting, was after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. We contacted um, every company, or I think every company in the I think we used like the Forbes 500 or something like that that had donated through their PACs to one of the people who were voted against confirming the election results that day, and that resulted in I think three companies. It was Marriott and a couple of others got back to us. So three out of 217 responded to us and said that they were cutting off the donations to those members indefinitely. And that led to just like an avalanche for a couple of weeks of hundreds of companies who were cutting off uh, money to election deniers. I thought maybe at the time it was helping establish new a new standard of political accountability for corporations. But over the next few years, we kind of followed the companies that had made those pledges and watched kind of one by one them back away from that as time went on. But I still think there was an important impact about um, just making the attempt to hold these companies accountable, and we still follow this story and do it every year. And we had I think there's about 12 or 15 companies that are still uh, abiding by their pledge.
Yeah, and on my end for impact, I think the stories that have been able to put a number on something that's happening that we know is happening, but what is the actual quantifiable impact there? And one example I can think about is a colleague and I a couple years ago had calculated how much more likely workers were to get injured or die on the job in extreme heat. And there was sort of this push legislatively in New York that continued to be stalled to enact protections on the job protections for outdoor workers. And so that, the governor cited our reporting and her push to advance those measures. So that felt good. And it was also just something that, was sort of, this is based on the data and this is a number that we can point to.
All right, well, we'll end it there. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for everyone who joined us, and I appreciate it, and congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.